does your beliefs end with like the supernatural or the creatures or whatever, right? Or do you subscribe to harder to believe, um, I guess conspiracies, right? I mean, I'm talking about like flat Earth and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, so there's always going to be that big caveat of, for any super hard conspiracy being, well, what do you know? Like, there's always going to be
Yeah,
the thing of there's always somebody above you, whether it be in power, money, stance, whatever, that could have an influence on what you're thinking or believing. That's always in the
yeah,
back of my mind, honestly, of just like, yeah, and to bring up conspiracies or in general, like, okay, one really out of there conspiracy that I believe in wholeheartedly, which I think most people do now more than anything. I think this has gained a lot of traction, is the idea that conspiracies in themselves, the concept, is a conspiracy. Who's to say a government or something, a higher up or anybody was just like, hey, they're getting really close. Give them all the evidence. Nobody will believe them, and then like they don't, and now it's perfectly hidden, things like that, things
I,
like flat earth. I am never going to believe flat earth. Okay, number one. Okay, there was a time where I was super involved in like research for like space and everything. It was something I was like diving
yeah,
deep into, and to the point where the more I read about flat earth, the more I had to say you need to stop. Like that hurts almost science, because like literally we have evidence from thousands of millions of
yeah,
whatever years ago of people doing the math with, you know not even technology that we use, like technology that we laugh at, like, here's two poles on the road and you can measure the shadows, things like that. And they're just like, no, there's hard line proof, the earth is round, there is no flat earth. I understand that some beliefs out there, whether it be religious or otherwise, have the things of like, oh, well, the earth is actually held by something, or reality is held by something, or held up. Sure. But hardline, like, hands on the table, show your cards, you know, Earth is round. There is no flat Earth. There is nothing like that. And there's some conspiracy like that where like they do more harm than good. Like the more you spread misinformation like that, the more people are gonna have to like hound on you and get it done more. I don't want to get into the specifics. I don't know like the inner workings of it enough, but there is a conspiracy theory I've come across recently, which came out to be a big like racial like issue thing of like, oh, did you know there's like giants that live like in the mountains in this one region of the earth? And it's like, where did that come from? Like, where did you believe that? And it's like, oh, these books written by these like scientists in the 50s. And
and
I'm
they're
just
still
like,
alive.
and I'm like, what kind of scientists are you talking about? And they're just like, oh, whatever. And I'm like, no, no, keep telling me, because you're gonna do more harm by spreading this information. And they're like, no, this doesn't exist. And I'm like, well, how do you know? And it's just like conspiracies in the end always boil down to either this is gonna be lighthearted and there's and it's possible, and like it's okay, or there's like an agenda behind this that if you go too deep, you're gonna be on some watch list somewhere.
Well, the thing
And
is, like the biggest thing when it comes to conspiracies, when it comes to like the cryptids, right?
right,
All of them are all going to be subject to the burden of proof is on the accuser.
exactly,
That is 100%. That's always going to be the case, and the reason for that is because that's you're basically claiming something is wrong here.
yeah,
Something is not in line with what we know to be as
yeah,
normal. So if you're changing the rules, you're changing the game. Then you need to
yeah,
give us that evidence. We need to understand how is the game changing. Like
yeah,
what is changing about the game. So my problem with that is like most conspiracies are fucking nonsense.
exactly,
Like and just because you're getting bigger doesn't mean you're
yeah,
getting better.
yeah,
And I hate to do it, but I'm apparently going to do this every single episode.
yeah,
Fast and the Furious.
yeah.
Just
Gets
because you're
bigger,
getting
but
bigger doesn't mean you're getting better.
yeah, like there's like smaller conspiracies, things like, oh, was this an inside job or was this done by an official? And it's like, sure, possibly, there's no way that we can prove it if there's proper cover up. But when you get to the bigger conspiracies, there are things just like, or like, celebrity conspiracies where it's like, oh, blank is alive, blank moved away. And it's like that's not hurting anybody technically. If they are, who cares? They're obviously not in the limelight anymore. You know, they're an average person like you or me at this point if they did do that. But when you get to bigger conspiracies, like I think that the sky is actually TV screens like the Truman Show, and it's like, where's your evidence, bud? And it's like, oh, they don't have any. But then they keep spouting it, and then it's like that's actually just hurting people because now people who are going to subscribe to that belief are going to deny more evidence of other science that's going to come out because they're just like, well, you can't prove that. Like, what's the difference between what you believe and I believe? There was one that I saw recently where there's a whole YouTube channel of a guy who's trying to prove that like the Sahara Desert and like certain like ruins like on that side of the world have like large animal like skeletons in there and that they used to exist. Like I think he said like the Sahara Desert's like a dragon because he's like if you look at the curve of the river and like the mountains like it makes a body and at first you're like no one's gonna believe this guy. Why would they? Like, there's no evidence of that. But then you see comments and follow-up channels that are, like, wholly believing them. And then if you try to school them on, like, actual science, then they're just like, well, what's different between what you're saying and they're saying? And that's always going to escalate to, like, they're not going to believe other things. And they're going to think other things are conspiracies when it's hardline fact. And so that's the dangerous game you play when you enter this whole conspiracy rabbit hole and like, conspiracy rabbit hole and, like, deep dive. Like you need to be grounded in something first. You need to have a line that you draw where you recognize that this could be possible, this could not be possible. You have to realize, you know, what works, what doesn't. You know, you could say who caused what world event. Sure. But when you get to the end of it and you realize that wow, that is crazy. You can't take that and go, I bet this isn't real either. Like you can't just make an assumption like that.
Yeah.
And that's what you do.
I think people want. It's a lot like what we were talking about with the cryptids, right? Like, I think a lot of people want to believe in something.
Yeah.
I think that.
You want to be one.
But some people make some really crazy shit to believe, though.
You want to be the chosen one that's gonna crack the case.
Yeah.
And everyone's gonna follow you, and you're gonna be like the main character. And then it's like cool if you want to believe that for your own perseverance, but
yeah.
You're not going to be the guy who's going to prove that we're living in a simulation. Like, and if you are, do you have a follow-up that's not being written by a director? Like, where are you going with this?
Some stories just end. There doesn't have to be some crazy, fantastic fucking bullshit after the fact. You know, JFK was killed. He was shot in the fucking head.
That's the end of it.
That's pretty much the end of it. You know what I mean? Like, don't get me wrong. There could be more. I'm not saying that there isn't any more. I'm saying what we have as evidence, this is what we got, you know what I mean? Yeah. But then you have stuff like after World War II, right? After World War II and, you know, all of the Nazis who escaped to Argentina and whatnot.
The Brazil boys.
After the fact, a Special Forces unit sent out of nothing but Jewish Special Forces, right? They literally tracked these people down and killed several of them, left them in boxes and left them in boxes in like abandoned homes and shit. And of course, you know, eventually these Nazis ended up being found dead in all these different locations. And you're just like, okay, that really fucking happened. These guys, like, it was a badass documentary, right? You can find it out there. They sat and they told you exactly what they did, like the plans, the buildup, and all that. That could have been considered a conspiracy, you know what I mean? Like, from somebody's perspective. But that shit really did happen. So, on one side, right, like, a lot of this is really fucking crazy, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But they come from something. Conspiracy, the word conspiracy exists. Just, it's mostly used, like, in a law kind of way.
Conspiracy to commit crime.
Yeah, conspiracy to...
But they exist. Like, the word exists for a reason, you know? There's
examples with the really intent of.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I definitely have my own conspiracies where I'm just kind of like, okay.
Yeah.
In the evidence, that's pretty interesting. I'm not going to straight up, you know, build my entire life around it for sure.
Yeah. but you see that, and if somebody else, like, says the same thing, you're kind of like, what do you believe? Because I'll tell you what I know. And I know a lot.
Yeah, and you have to kind of do like...
Kind of.
Well,
yeah.
What about this?
What do you know?
You have to gauge somebody and what they're willing to believe, because
Yeah.
if not, they're just gonna think you're bad shit, you know.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to
Yeah.
gauge somebody. Like, you build up to it. You're like, oh, you believe in ghosts? Oh yeah.
Yeah. Like my online conspiracy of that's like I wholeheartedly believe in it, but I'm not gonna let it affect anything else. Is the conspiracies are fed to
Populous.
undermine
Unsuspecting.
the ones. Like there's the whole thing of just like, oh, Area 51 isn't where the aliens are. You want to look for Area 52, and it's like, yeah, that's a funny,
Typical.
popular joke and like spread around like conspiracy theory. But there is a 100% chance of reality that is something that's like, oh no, there probably is somewhere that the government has things that we don't know about. And they did the opposite, where they told somebody, did you know Area 51's where the aliens at? Meanwhile, it's somewhere like in Nebraska, like in a guy's room. And it's like, no one's going to look there because you're looking for this other thing. And that's just like, that's something I believe in. Like, whenever people are like, oh, I think that, you know, time. This is a completely separate topic, but like, I think that time travel is real, but they're not allowed to go back. And I'm like, cool. Guess what? If somebody came up and told you that, how do you know that they're not saying that to lean you off of something else? Like, you can't. Conspiracies feed into themselves, eat themselves up like two black holes. Like, you get too close to one conspiracy, another one's gonna come in and derail it. And who's to say that somebody's not, feeding that just to stop the conversation there?
Yeah.
And that's pretty much that's like the end all be all that I will always believe in. Is just like, you can't take anything seriously because you don't know what to take seriously anymore. Like, it's not like it used to be where
So
you
is
could just
there-
paper and print it and they'd believe you.
So is there like any one conspiracy, like a bigger conspiracy that you do believe in? Like, what's the biggest one that you actually are like, that you're 100% like subscribed to?
I mean,
Or is there one?
the biggest one would have to be I mentioned it as a joke, but I mean, the biggest one would have to be, in the end, some sort of time travel or manipulation will exist, but for the sake of the media that we've made in our own like lifetime as humanity and understanding, it would be bad to go back and mess with things because that just causes like paradoxes.
Yeah.
But also because on my own, I've seen and done plenty of research of things just like, oh, well, we don't really know, like, physically, we can't physically mess with time. Like, we can observe it. That's all we can do. But we did observe that under gravity, with various planets and space anomalies, time does change. Certain things in space, or like gravity wells, things like that. Like, they're just like, oh, we have a theory that depending on the intensity or lack of intensity, space travel and time may be different. For example, someone goes to space for a year, our understanding of a year, but depending on when they land, I mean, it's time's relative. Who knows how long they think they spent up there?
Yeah.
Interstellar.
Exactly. Don't get me started on
That
Interstellar.
fucking movie, that ending, dude, it just killed
I hate
me.
that movie so much, dude. I hate it. But like, you get to that point, and then you're just like, I wholeheartedly believe that maybe it does exist, but you can't go back in time and prove it. Like, you just have to wait for it to happen. And even if it never happens, there's always the possibility that it will happen, but you'll never know, because unless you see it with your own eyes in your lifetime, like, no one's going to go back in time and tell you. I wouldn't be surprised if some form of time travel does work, that if they ever do get it, they're like, we need to send one person back to somewhere and tell them not to mess with anything and leave this exact like item here so we can prove it. I think Stephen Hawking did it forever ago. He's like, oh, I wrote down the coordinates and time of a meeting in a very specific location that I only told like certain people, and if someone shows up, that means space travel is real, or that means time travel is real. And they were like, oh, did it happen? And he's like, I can't tell you, because if I tell you, it might mess it up. And it's like, okay. And then I think he came out and was like, oh yeah, no, nobody went. And it's like, cool. And then he was immediately followed by, but if somebody did go, who knows if that would have messed with the timeline of proving it or not. Yeah. And I was like, exactly. Like, we can't know. And that's why that's another thing I believe in wholeheartedly, is that in the end, I feel like we will reach time travel eventually. And maybe it already exists relatively, of course, because if it exists, they can go whenever, but they can't go back. And so because you can't go back, we're not going to know. Certainly not in our lifetimes. It'll probably be like thousands of years in the future when they're just like, Hey, we
Yeah.
invented time travel. We figured out the tachyons do in fact exist and are manipulable, and we know how to work with gravity. We made a space walkway because we can't say Stargate, and we're able to go through it. Things like that, something like that.
Have you ever seen that movie 12 Monkeys with Bruce Willis?
Yes.
It's like the perfect thing. Like I think it does the job better than Looper does, but it's like, like, oh yeah, time travel exists,
Yeah.
but you can only go back. Like you can't go forward. And
Yeah.
so like Bruce Willis as a child sees this guy murdered in an airport, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, it really sticks with him. And then at the end, like you see somebody sends Bruce Willis back in time,
Yeah.
to stop this biological terror attack. And then he goes to an airport trying to stop the guy, and he gets killed. So he's literally seeing himself in the future being killed, and it's like this really weird, like it's like a loop. You didn't stop anything.
And it's to the point where, because it's such a work of fiction in our own time, in our own life right now, where you can't make a hardline rule for time travel. It's all based off of theories.
Yeah, everything's theoretical.
Something from that was like the paradox of like, oh, a time traveler opens a portal and assembles a gun, and then he looks into the portal and sees himself assembling it and shoots it. How did he have the gun if he never assembled it? That's just an example.
Yeah.
But like we can't
paradox. Yeah, paradox. The loop.
Like we know if that happens, nothing will happen, and it'll just be like, oh, you created a separate timeline. But we can't prove that because we don't have time travel. So that's a thing of like, I believe, yes, I think it does exist, but we're just really cautious about it, and so we can't find out until it happens.
Yeah.
And then when it does happen, it'll literally be. I believe when it does happen, when we get to that point, it'll be like
it'll be too late because they're gonna open a black hole and it's gonna fucking destroy everything.
Yeah, that hadron collider or super collider that we have somewhere underneath one of these states. We can open a black hole. Like, why is that here? Why don't you do it in space? Like in Cloverfield paradox.
Get in the get underneath the time shield so you can be one of the survivors.
Make sure to duck and cover.
Time bunker. Right, the time bunker.
Exactly.
I don't think I subscribe to any real big name conspiracies.
Mm-hmm.
I said big
brand name.
I don't really think I can subscribe to any of them.
Time conspiracy.
I think it was like the Sandy Hook conspiracy that started really showing how much damage conspiracies can do.
That's what it always comes down to. Yeah. That's what it always comes down to. Conspiracies can be super harmful. Like if not done, if taken to the extreme, they can be.
But I can understand, right? Because there are trauma actors, right? There are trauma actors, and I can understand that watching it, and you're of the impression that you're getting a firsthand account, right? And it ends up being a trauma actor, and you're just like, well, my whole world, like my mind is blown. This should be the person who is directly involved,
Yeah.
I can understand somebody seeing that and thinking like, well, what the fuck? What else is different, But no. That's where the real damage started to come into play.
Yeah, that's at that point is when you're just like, you have to draw a line and be grounded somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good point too, because it's just at what point can you be like, oh, that kind of makes sense to me. All right, I guess,
yeah,
right.
And then you walk away from it like just like knowing that.
Yeah. Well, you don't want to be. You don't want to be the Pepe Silvio, it's like the freaking, the writing on the wall, they got the maps and the push pins, the string theories and all that. Yeah. Like at what point do you become that though? Like is it like, oh, I have all the stuff that I believe in, these neat little folders in a row here, but it's like, no, I got to start putting them on there. It has to make sense. If I look at it from another perspective, if I can get on the outside in, like like drawing that sand, like do you have to know yourself at what point like it just starts getting like too much?
Yeah, I mean,
you should.
Yeah, you should know yourself.
Know that moment, you shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, you should know yourself when the belief that you have towards a conspiracy theory or an idea or anything, when it starts to get destructive, you should know when to stop. And the issue with conspiracy theories is that when you learn when to stop, you never know when you're not stopping at the right time. Like for the people who are just like, I believe that, this product has mind control or something weird and dumb, they'll be like, if you go too far, you turn into, oh, this product is causing this thing. And then scientifically people start believing that. And then they're just like, well, great. Now we believe that, this diet soda is causing like your arm to fall off when that's not true. But then there's
not
but then like
at least.
yeah, and then it's like okay, sure, But then, eventually if you get too far or if you stop, enough and you're just like, yeah, this doesn't make sense, or maybe sure, like, then you never know when you're gonna be on the cusp of like finding something big. But if you go too big, like you're gonna cause more harm than good.
Yeah. I think the whole like burden of truth is so ridiculous too, because like at some point like you're gonna be spending all your time, your energy, your resources to try and find out something, and even if you do, there's gonna be just a mountain of others working twice as hard just to disprove it. Yeah. Like think about the stuff that we've discovered like within the last decade, things that have been disproven, from like hundreds of years ago. Yeah. And it's just like what if that is like whatever you discover is just the next thing, and they're like, okay, well, it turns out I could disprove this. Like even maybe the whole thing with black holes, like at first light couldn't escape, now light can escape. Now the differentiation of time, like everything that we discover is just almost
we don't know.
Almost yeah, it's almost a non-certainty.
Facts.
Yeah.
I guess
we have theories, but there's theories based on what we have experienced scientifically. Yeah. That we can give an estimated guess, but I mean nothing is 100% until we've actually physically watched it happen with our own eyes. And even then there's reason to speculate.
Yeah, like I guess an example of like going too far, but you stop before like you hit something would be like, okay, the pyramids were made by aliens. Okay, I mean we know that's not true. Because we know how Egypt made the pyramids, and they're like,
gonna say something else. Actually, like, man,
it's like actually we know how they were made, and it's like here's the math that people have done to prove how it could be made. Cool, and then you read deeper, and they're like, hey, did you notice that like there's these hieroglyphs that show things that look like USBs and laptops and rocket ships? How did they have that? I think aliens gave it to them, and then eventually they're like, no, you're just really discrediting like whatever tech they had at the time.
How much effort and people died from that shit.
Yeah, and then they stop, and then you're like, you're right. But then if you go further, then you realize like, hey, we should probably read further. How come they have all that, but like we can't find any of it? And then you remember like, hey, did you know the Library of Alexandria burned down? It was probably in there. You're not going to go far enough to put it on that and blame it and go, hey, we should probably talk about how much damage that did, and like, we could try to recover some of that or something. It's like, no, you're going to stop at aliens.
Yeah.
Far enough when you should have stopped at the very beginning and not discredit, what humanity, like, what's happened since then and address those issues first. And then you can keep going. Like people start and stop at conspiracy theories, like at the wrong times, I believe, like too many times. Like the whole, bring it back around, the whole JFK thing, they stop at the end when they go, well, we don't know what happened. It was probably like the government or the CIA. And then you stop and you're like, are you not going to explore that and go into like, that might be a bit messed up? And they're like, no, why would we? And it's like, okay, fine. You're just going to go far enough to where you have an answer and then leave. But then if you go too far, you get to the Sandy Hook thing where it's like, oh, now I believe that didn't happen. It's like, why would you believe that? There's literally no basis for that. And then somebody comes out saying that there's a basis for it. And you're like, okay, you're willing to research that far. Go into something else. That's like, go into a different conspiracy that'll actually like help us or prove something. And it's like conspiracies are a 50-50 coin flip. Either you're going to have some fun with it and be like, actually, I do think that we all see colors differently, but we just have names for what they, relatively are. And then you're instead going to go into, no, I think the earth is actually made of leaves. And here's my evidence.
It's a completely different spectrum.
Yeah, it's like,
the problem is you can't reason people out of a situation they didn't first reason themselves into. Mm-hmm. So the people who are looking for these things, the people who absolutely need something either wild to believe in, or they're usually. No, I shouldn't say that. I don't want to get attacked or anything, but a lot of it comes from like the religious folks, like the really conservative side, right? The truth is, like, people need something to believe in, and conspiracies make it really easy to believe in something wild.
Yeah,
even if there's absolutely no basis whatsoever.
not to drive it away from conspiracy theories, but there's actually I need to. I'll probably send the video to you, and I don't know. You can watch it or link it or whatever. But there's this video game, Shadow of the Colossus. I'm sure we've all heard of it.
Oh yeah.
Where in the original game there was this whole like theory that there was these items you could collect outside of the game, and they would lead to a map somewhere. And ultimately they didn't lead to anything because that didn't. It was all glitches and things like that. But in the end, this whole fan base of people looking for it, they made a whole like subreddit community, and in the end they were like, yeah, this isn't going to lead to anything. Like there's no end because it was never intended for it.
Did anyone ever say that it was a thing?
I'll have to find the video and send it.
I know that there's like isn't there like a super secret thing that no one's ever figured out in Shadow of the Colossus?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Where it's like outside the game, there's like 26 like key points, or like you can put them together. And in the original game, it doesn't go anywhere because it was like it was the thing that the creators never intended. But then when they remade the game, they went ahead and finished that so that you get it. But at the end, people were like, "Well, what was it in the original?" And it's like there was nothing. But what it was people wanted something to grasp on and believe in.
Yeah,
like people
like it was a super minimalistic game. And you made it into something more.
It was about the chase. It was about a community of people coming together, going, "Wow, I think we're really on the cusp of believing something. We need to get more and more people to believe this thing with us so that we can get to the truth." And then when you find out that there's nothing there, it's like, well, it was about the journey.
How could you do that to me?
Like one other person's like, no, it's not. We need to keep going, and that's the issue where it's like there's certain things that you should be doing that for, where you're just like, oh my god, I think we're gonna find out. Like I think we can. It's the whole like just like go deeper into the ocean to find out what sea creatures are there. Like, oh, I think we're about to we're making tech that we can use that can like go deep or like sonar or whatever, and we're gonna be able to explore the ocean. And then one person in charge doesn't care, and they're like, actually, I'm gonna use that tech to find out what's underneath this state because I think there's a creature there. And it's like, we can only use this. It's like, what are you doing? Like, subscribe to a better conspiracy, or subscribe to a like idea that can functionally help us as a humanity, instead of just like your own personal, I need to find out where this thing is.
We're just in that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think everyone just wants to find like the hidden truth or whatever. It's like oh, I want the Easter egg behind this. I want the cheat code, this and that. It's like the old God of War, like, oh, you got that number and you can call Kratos. That stupid crap.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But like,
forgot about that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like that's what it feels like to me when I hear stuff like this, because like that was that era where all that stuff was so popular. And even like the whole Guardians of the Galaxy, like, oh, nobody's figured out that last James Gunn Easter egg, right? And you're like, oh, so what is it? He's like, oh, well, nobody's figured out yet. Like, so are you gonna say it, or just like
and he's so the people don't stop enjoying his movie, and the community of people don't freak out when they get to the end and like, well, what now?
Yeah, and it comes to be like the whole conspiracy theories about whatever, like they eventually become like zany and goofy, and then people make memes about it, and it's just like the people who truly believe in that, they're probably not thinking about it in the same way that you are, because you're just putting your copy and paste aliens on whatever you want, but it's like. There are those people who are diehards. They are 100. Like, I wouldn't even say fanatical, because like to them they're not. Like, they really believe in what they're doing. So it's crazy to like like you said, you have to draw that line and separate the facts and beliefs that you are 100% behind, and like the stuff that's just like leading you down those trail of breadcrumbs that isn't going anywhere.
Yeah. And a lot of these YouTube channels, like, man, they play on that. They play on you
absolutely
getting
clickbait.
Lost in that information.
Yeah,
you'll find a ton of videos that are just the same shit over and over.
Yeah,
and you'll watch every single one of them. I'm sure there's people out there that watch every single one of those videos, and they're all the same fucking information. Like, that's one thing I've been cutting out, is like, if it's a story that I've heard before, right? Like, and if it's like the same story over again, what need do I have to watch it? Like, I've seen this story before.
Yeah. You want that something different.
Like, unless you like click on it and scroll through and see people say like, oh, I'm glad you talked about this. This is something new. Like, there's no need in watching it. Like, why would you? Like, at some point, it's like that whole, I don't know if this is technically a conspiracy theory or if it's an observation of like, we've found every note or we found every musical note like in existence, or like we've made every combination. So for now on, when you hear music, you can trace it back to another song that already exists somewhere, because there's no other combinations, because it's technically a finite number, because there's not like an infinite number of musical notes. And I'm like, that's cool, that's awesome, and that's like probably the best example of a clean conspiracy theory,
Yeah.
because you can find the evidence if you put in the work to look up every musical note ever and then run the numbers for how many combinations it can be and then find those.
But
And you can
combination, right?
yeah, but like even if you do, you're not going to hurt anybody with that. Like all you're going to do is eventually come to the point where you're like, this song sounds a lot like this song. Are they ripping them off, or is it only because, we don't have any other music anymore? And even then, that can be disproven when people are like, oh, well, now there's genres of music where you edit, pre-existing sounds to do something different. And it's like, okay, cool.
There'd
And
still
so
be a
it's one of
finite
those,
number.
yeah, and it's like one of those conspiracy theories where this won't hurt anybody if it's proven right or wrong.
But the problem
Like it's just something to have.
But the problem is, and right, like there's technicalities to it, right? So yes,
Yeah.
right, while there's technically a finite number of notes you can possibly hit, and there's a finite number of, in the order they go in, what if you have a computer generated or a computer controlled piano that never stops playing?
Yeah.
Then the music is technically infinite. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so
you may find a repeating note like every now and then, but then you're just like, well, yeah, but that was a repeating note with like a new thing. Okay, it keeps going. just keep
exactly,
going.
because it's adding to the order, right? Like it is now the controlling order. As long as it continues to play, then the infiniteness of it continues on.
Yeah, and again, it kind of turns into like that whole unknown horror of our understanding. Like, do you want to keep expanding and trying to learn every possible thing in the universe, or should you stop and look at what you're doing, specialize, and be like, hey, I think we should look deeper into our local issues and solve that first. But it's just one of those things of just like,